As we transition from the forms of subsistence agriculture to the forms of commercial agriculture, I want to do some comparative analysis and look at food consumption as well. Let's start by looking at farm size. In developed countries, the average size of a farm is hundreds of acres. This is because in developed countries, agriculture is overwhelmingly commercial agriculture. Whereas in developing countries, the average farm size is generally only a few acres. Now, this does not mean that all agriculture in developing countries is subsistence, because of course it's not. Places like India and Thailand are massive exporters of rice. That would be a commercial agricultural operation. Egypt is a big exporter of cotton. That's also done in a commercial way. Nevertheless, in developed countries, there really are either zero or very, very few subsistence farmers on very small plots of land. Whereas in developing countries, of course, there can be large numbers of people operating on a subsistence level. So take a look. You can see that this is a commercial agricultural operation. Both of these are in developed countries. This is subsistence agriculture. Can you see the difference between these things? Okay, take a close look. Very, very different. Very large plots of land, very small plots of land. Very mechanized, people doing the work. In the United States, 75% of the domestically produced food comes from the largest 5% of the farms. So when you hear politicians talking about the small farmer, come on, we know in reality they're talking about the big farmer. The small farmer has almost no contact with their politician, whereas the big farming operations are going to have money, and that of course is going to draw the politicians in. 90% of commercial farms in the United States, though, are family owned. Mechanization allows this, while the corporations that buy and sell the necessities of modern agriculture require this. Mechanization has permitted developed countries to significantly decrease the number of people working on the farms, because the work is done by machinery rather than human hands and animals. This type of agriculture is not cheap, but by scaling up production, you scale down cost, particularly to the consumer, who then expects the cost to remain low. For the farmer, the larger production creates a scenario where loss or deficit is also scaled up, because the amount of money involved with a larger operation can present both greater potential profit but also catastrophic loss. This system requires the farmer to continue the cheapest production possible in order to make a profit, or be outcompeted, go heavily into debt, and ultimately lose the farm to a big corporation. The basic motto is go big or get out. To the farmer, the cost of remaining in business is very high, and they often run on very small profit margins with significantly scaled up dollar costs and potential profits and losses. For example, if you make a 1% profit on $100, you make $1. But if you make a 0.5%, 0.5% profit on $10,000, you make $50. This massive production upscaling has brought prices to the consumer down. In 1950, the average American family spent 22% of its income on food. Today, it's about 6.4%. And most of that 6.4% goes to food processors, transportation, wholesalers, and retailers, not the farmers. Only about 15 cents on the dollar actually makes it to the farmer. Farmland in developed countries tends to be in areas that are not densely populated, right? Think about it. You don't have farmland generally all over the place in your city. The market, as a result of that, is therefore regional, continental, and global rather than local. Do you look at the food products you buy and see where they come from? Try it. I've already mentioned this before. Take a look at it and see where these things come from. Because we are exporting all over the world, and the world is exporting to us as well. Do you remember these maps? So the darker the orange color, what that means is this: the larger the number of tractors on the land, and the lighter the color, the fewer tractors. So the lighter the color, the more people that are working on the land, and it's being done more by hand or with animals. Whereas the darker the color, the more mechanized the agricultural system, and the more mechanized the agricultural system is, that means the fewer people that are needed to be on the land procuring the calories that we all eat. Take a look at the share of labor force employed in agriculture. The darker the color, the more people employed in agriculture. And remember, in the United States, less than 3% of our population produces the food and the other products that come from the land that we are all consuming. The rest of us are freed up from that. The calories are produced for us. So let's look at subsistence agriculture a little bit. This type of farming requires more people on the land, and they're working on smaller plots of land. I mean, remember, on the right-hand side, you see all of that intercropping that's happening. Whereas this type of farming requires far fewer farmers per acre, but it's much more expensive. Really, it has to be in order to be profitable. In the US, we produce substantial surpluses of food that are then sold around the world because our population is not big enough to consume it all. Likewise, we demand everything all the time, regardless of the season, and because of that, we purchase food products from all over the world. Let's take a look at food consumption. Where do people get the majority of their calories? Do you know where that comes from? Like what you're eating, where are the majority of calories for the average person coming from? Cereal grains. That's grasses that have this shoot that comes up, and then a head is produced on this shoot. And that head then has grains in it, which are the seeds that then get propagated naturally. Human beings a long time ago figured out that you could eat those and that they were calorie-dense food products. And of course, then we began to produce them ourselves through agriculture. And the three main cereal grains are wheat, corn, which is also known as maize, of course, and rice. These combine to account for 90% of all grain production globally, 90%, and 40% of all the calories that are consumed globally. As you can see, one of the results is a homogeneity of the farmland. Diversity of crops, which is common in subsistence agriculture, and my own backyard for that matter, gives way to sameness on a large-scale commercial farm in order to be profitable and compete on a large scale. This also requires a need to find ways to produce more and more and more per acre. Where do you think the technology comes from to allow that to happen? It comes from big corporations that make profits from farmers by creating the things that allow the farmer to squeeze more food out of their land. Those same companies oftentimes, I mean, really, literally, the exact same companies oftentimes buy the raw farm product, that is the food, from the farmer and then transport it, process it, package it, wholesale it, and advertise and promote it. The farmer ends up being a relatively small player in the big agricultural picture, even though the farmer is the single most important component in the agricultural picture. It's remarkable, really. Traditional farming methods required diversity of crops and animals on the landscape, and it required far more people to tend the land and procure sustenance. In some ways, the land had to sustain itself, with animal waste and slurry used to support healthy soils and crop rotation used to prevent nutrient burnout. Did this methodology produce more food, that old school way of doing farming? Did it produce more food? Was this way of doing things more efficient? Was it more cost effective? The answers are likely no, no, and no. But was the quality better? In most instances, the answer is actually yes. Think about the taste of plums or tomatoes or peaches you get in a big grocery store in the US. Now, compare that to the taste of these things from the backyard garden. There's no comparison. In fact, all of those things, plums, tomatoes, and peaches, have been engineered for ripening, durability, and stability. That engineering, like hybridization, has altered the fruit. They're generally less flavorful, period. To strip one thing and replace it with another, say fragility being replaced with durability, often results in other things being altered, like flavor, odor, texture, water content, things like that. But we can get much more of the end product per acre by doing it. And when chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides are added, production can boom. Quality may diminish, but production can boom. And I'm not criticizing it, but I want you, as a consumer of food products, to understand where they come from and how they get to you. Let's look at food consumption. Wheat is the main grain consumed in developed countries, along with some developing countries in Central Asia and Southwest Asia, which is the Middle East. It's because Central Asia and Southwest Asia are dry, and wheat does well in dry climates. It doesn't do well in wet climates. Rice is the main cereal grain consumed in developing countries in East, Southeast, and South Asia. It's much wetter there. Corn, or maize, is the main cereal grain produced globally, but much of it is fed to animals. And because of that, it's a kind of secondary food source, because of course what happens is we don't eat the corn, we feed the corn to animals, they turn that into meat, and then we eat the animals. In sub-Saharan Africa, just to point this out, grain intake is a bit more diverse because it includes much more millet and sorghum. So what are the sources of protein in developed versus developing countries? In developed countries, meat accounts for about 1/3 of the protein intake. In developing countries, meat only accounts for about 10% of protein intake, because there's lots of things that have protein in them, not just meat. But you can see in developed countries, we're going to eat much more meat. Look at daily per capita protein supply in 1961 versus 2017. Just take a look at it. The darker the blue, or the darker the color in general, the greater the amount of protein supply. And notice the areas I just circled. What does this explain? What is the correlation? How this has changed through time? It's called developing. That's what it is. That as people get more money, they tend to be inclined to begin to consume other things, including much more protein. And look at protein by source. Cereals, which are the oranges and the yellows, versus meat. And notice that the meat consumption is happening overwhelmingly in the richer countries of the world. Now, I know Brazil and Argentina. Argentina is a pretty rich place. And Brazil is a rich country. It just has a kind of messed up system that doesn't allow much equity. And now look at protein from meat. Okay, take a look at the left-hand side. Meat consumption, kilogram per person per year. A kilogram has 2.2 pounds in it. You know, in the United States, 100 to 153 kilograms. So multiply that by 2.2 per person per year. And I eat almost no meat at all. So somebody's making up my meat consumption. And then if you look at the right-hand side, you can see how meat production from 1961 to 2018 has increased around the world. What does increasing meat production and consumption indicate and correlate to? It's development. That's what it is. For better and for worse.